I often get young people hitting me up to ask me what kind of car should I buy for my first car. So if you're looking for a good first car, I'm doing this video for you. Frankly, there's never been a better time in history to search for a car. There's never been a larger selection of potential cars from which to choose as well. But the first thing you need to do a realistic assessment of your budget, not fantasy stuff, real assessment. I'll share those thoughts right after the break. I don't know if you know this, but I actually now have a merch store, and if you haven't checked out the video description below my videos, then you're missing out. Currently, I've got a pack full of movie quote t-shirts, and more styles are being added every month, and new items are in development right now. So have a look, see if there's anything you like, and wear it with pride. The link is in the video description below. If you're counting on your mom and dad to buy a 1,000 horsepower R34 GTR for your 16th birthday, you're not being realistic. You're wasting my time, your time, and everybody else's time. Your financial position will dictate your choice. Are you working? How much of a car payment can you afford? What do your other bills look like? Are mom and dad going to co-sign on the loan? Are they going to give you the down payment? Do you have the down payment? You better get all those questions answered before you even start shopping. Let's assume that you're not 16 years old and go forward on the assumption that your budget is somewhere between, say, $14,000 and maybe say $25,000. Doesn't matter if part of it is cash and the rest is finance, but that's your budget, okay? So generally speaking, no matter what kind of car you're looking for, you want to find a car that's preferably turbocharged from the factory and has a manual transmission if you know how to drive a manual. That's a good platform, no matter what the car is, okay? So with that in mind, there are plenty of options, assuming that you can live with a used car, in some cases living with a 10-year-old car, and in one case, a car that's even older than that. So let's take a look at my picks, and they're not necessarily in order, but they're in sort of where I would start and go through it, okay? So let's talk about that. I'm a big fan of the 2014 20-16 Focus, Ford Focus, which uses a 2-liter turbocharged 4, which makes 250 horsepower and about 270 pound-feet of torque right out of the box. You add bolt-ons and a tune, and that will get you well over 300 horsepower and a platform that weighs 3,200 pounds. There's lots of performance available for these cars. I've driven one of these cars, and they're quite fun to drive, despite the fact that they're front-wheel drive, and you know I'm not really a big front-wheel drive guy. But anyway, after that, I would start thinking about maybe a Mazda Speed 3. The 2010 to 2014 Mazda Speed 3s would be a good choice because they have a 2-liter turbocharged engine, which makes a very respectable 263 horsepower and pumps out 280 pound-feet. They're no joke. Making 300 horsepower with these cars is pretty much no problem. They're practical enough for daily driving duties for you, your wife, your girlfriend, whatever. These cars are also available with a 6-speed gearbox, which is a giant plus. That's another recommendation. The Velosters are cool cars, and while they're underrated by a lot of people, they're starting to catch on in the tuner crowd. The early base car used a 1.6-liter turbocharged 4-banger, making about 138 horsepower. Not earth-shattering, but not my first choice. But if you can spend a bit more, look for the 2017 Turbo R that makes about 200 horsepower. And better yet, if you have a little more money, go up to the 2020 to 2022 model years, and those cars have power numbers going from about 250 horsepower to 270 horsepower. They're actually decent looking. Nowadays, there are some performance parts to support these cars, and pretty much enough to address all or most of the weak aspects of these cars. The VW Golf. I've always been a fan of the Volkswagen Golf, going back to when these cars were called a Volkswagen Rabbit here in the United States. And while the Mark II was my favorite looks-wise, the Mark 7 VW Golfs and the Mark 6s are very close to my heart, but especially the 2014 GTIs, which are amazing cars. They look fantastic, and they're also reasonably affordable. Depending on which year that you're going to buy, you're going to get something around 210 horsepower to 227 horsepower. Turn the boost up with some simple mods, and you can pick up a lot more horsepower. One of the best traits of the VWs is that there's a ton of aftermarket parts for these cars. You can pretty much change everything in the thing. And if you can't afford to get a Mark 7, like I said, your best option is a Mark 6 if it's within your budget. E92 BMWs. Back in 2016 to 2013, everybody was all about these cars, but mostly the M3s, but they missed the 335i, which has a potent twin-turbo 3-liter inline 6 making 300 horsepower out of the box. out of the box. Turn up the boost, install an E73 kit, and turn it up some more, and you'll be pushing 420 horsepower at the wheels, even with stock turbos. That is fantastic. And the E92 is a great platform. It flies under the radar of the cops if you resist the urge to race the thing out. And a BMW is just classier than all the other cars I have on this list. It simply lacks the boy racer like. So if you like it clean but fast, that's your thing. So don't be a basic bitch with your 7-owner G35. Fox body Mustangs, 1988 to 1993. Yes, I know these cars are older than the others on this list, but they are on my list for several reasons. First, these cars are a mechanic's dream. Pretty much every mod you want to make these cars can be done in your garage with basic tools, pretty much, okay? So there's so many performance parts, you should probably start doing research on the option a year before you even buy the car. But don't wait to buy because prices are climbing quickly. But if you want the lightest version, get the 5.0 LX notchback. It has a 5-liter, 225 horsepower engine, and that's all you need to start with. If you need a little extra room for your Tennessee top hat, your mullet, your Kentucky waterfall, whatever, get the Mustang GT hatchback. But whatever you do not buy a convertible. They're not good chassis to start with. Subaru WRXs. Now prices are starting to climb, even on the older models, 2013 and older, but I wouldn't go older than a 2014 model unless you're an actual Subaru mechanic or you work as a mechanic at a dealership. They're all-wheel drive. The 2014 uses the 2.5-liter turbocharged flat four, making 265 horsepower, and of course the STI makes 305 horsepower. And whatever WRX that you buy, I prefer the sedan. The 5-door hatch, which we used to call station wagons, look more like a riced-out Mazda Speed 3, I guess. But they're fantastic cars, and if you can afford one, I would definitely consider one of those. Number 3, Scion FRS and the Subaru BRZ, basically the same cars. Both versions use the flat 4 2-liter engine making 200 horsepower, but the list of possible modifications is as long as my shoelaces. But you can't really find any faults with the basic setup. It's front engine, it's rear-wheel drive, it's basically a driver's cockpit, everything that you need, nothing that you don't, and it has a manual transmission. And this car is ridiculously fun to drive. I drove my sons, I had way more fun than I thought I did. The only really downfall of this car is the bone stock cars make about 155 horsepower to the wheels and they're rated at 200 horsepower at the crank. The FRS also suffers from an infuriating torque dip right around 4,000 RPM. But this can be fixed with the simple tune and an E85 conversion. A Vishnu Performance open flash tablet coupled with a set of good headers can get about 24 or 25 horsepower increase according to dyno videos that I've been watching. And you add this with the cold air intake and you get the total wheel horsepower to around 190. That's much more respectable. Other options include the entry-level muscle cars. While it would be nice to have the money to go buy a GT350 Mustang or a Hellcat Charger or a Scat Pack anything, most parents are not going to approve such a purchase, so you can kiss that goodbye unless your parents are dumb or they're loaded and they don't live with you. So anyway, for young people who are already living away from home, these cars are pretty much priced out of your reach anyway. But what you can do is hop into the lower trim levels of these cars. For example, the Ford Mustang EcoBoost 2.3-liter turbocharged Mustang makes 270 horsepower to the wheels stock. A few bolt-on mods and you'll be making nearly 320 horsepower and 400 pound-feet of torque to the wheels. That's plenty. While the V6 Chargers and Challengers are not turbocharged, so you're basically stuck adding only a cold air intake and a slightly bigger exhaust system, and then you're done. You have to live with that, unless you have a few $1,000s burning a hole in your pocket so you can add a big giant supercharger on it. But if you had that money, you would have bought the Scat Pack anyway. So realistically, you buy a V6 Dodge, put a cold air intake on it, and then just put mufflers in a tune, and you're done. And just remember, the Challengers and Chargers are not good for canyon runs. In fact, they suck for that, unless you're going to spend thousands of dollars on suspension. Stupid to do that on a V6 commuter car, but it's your money. The brakes aren't great. And these cars also lack the power to be sideshow superstars. So if you want to fake it till you make it, then maybe a lower trim level muscle car would be fine. And at the top of my list, it's got to be the Mazda Miata, or at least close to the top of the list. Before you dismiss these cars, don't hit me with, oh, it's a girl's car, blah, 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 because I'm going to tell you, you don't really know anything about them. Watch YouTube videos about autocross events. Miatas are very competitive, and if you've ever been in one of those cars that's properly set up and run through the canyon, you'll have more fun than you ever thought. The third and fourth generation of Miatas are light, agile, and very modifiable. The NC chassis is the third generation Miata, comes with a 2-liter engine making 170 horsepower. The ND is the fourth generation of the Miata and comes with the newer Skyactiv 2-liter making 181 horsepower. You have to look up to see which one has more modification potential before you make your choice. The front engine and rear-wheel drive configuration makes these cars flickable and nimble, and since these cars weigh only about 2,300 pounds, with some modest suspension and brake upgrades, you'll have tons of fun in the canyon and on the racetrack and at autocross events, and they're cheap to fix and cheap to modify. Another bonus is that these cars get great gas mileage, they're super cheap to fix and modify, and most of all, they're easy to work on right at home with basic tools as well. Great car for a young person just getting started. Now, I know these cars have a reputation of being for girls and so forth, but like I said, it's unfair. To perform well, cars need a good chassis, a great power to weight ratio, and for young people, they should be cheap to own, operate, and insure. And if it's easy to work on, that's just a giant bonus. And so the Miata checks all those boxes. There are plenty of other cars that I could have recommended or considered recommending, cars like the Hyundai Genesis or the G35 or the G37s, but most G35s have been abused by their owners. Some of them have been damaged, and some of them have just been beat to hell. G37, same thing. The Genesis, like the 2008 to 2012, which are affordable enough to make this lift have some serious deficiency. They were offered with a 2-liter turbo engine or heavy 3V8, 3-liter V6. They just don't have any performance parts for them. So what you're doing in that car is putting lipstick on a pig, so I'm not even going to mention it in the same breath with these guys. If you're wondering what I was looking at to put a car on this list, it came down to this: affordability. I was looking at cars for $14,000 to $25,000. And frankly, if your budget is less than $14,000, listen what I'm going to tell you. I suggest that you buy a beater and just drive it until you finish trade school or university or you get into your career, because it's just going to be a burden. Or perhaps wait till you get your military enlistment bonus. I'm pretty sure there's a Ford or Dodge dealership next to every military installation in the country. So go get your Scat Pack when you re-enlist. Aftermarket support is another thing. If you're buying a car where there are little to no available engine upgrades or suspension upgrades, that kind of thing, that's a deal breaker for me. I made that mistake of buying my first 3 cars based on their looks because I thought I liked the style of the cars, but when I found out they had very little aftermarket support, I got turned off on that. Basically, buying a car for the style is like marrying a Playboy Playmate just because she's pretty, but she turns out to be an airhead and pretty vapid. Number 3, performance potential. All of these cars have potential beyond their factory equipment, but are pretty good out of the box. While several of my picks are front-wheel drive, and you know how I generally feel about front-wheel drive, but there are still good picks for a new driver, especially if you live in a place where it rains or snows. Also, the front-wheel drive cars are usually much cheaper to insure, especially in Europe, and especially if you're under 35 years of age, and this is a big plus for a young person, so you have to factor all that stuff in. Practicality. Young people who are in their early 20s to mid-20s, late 20s, that kind of thing, unless you turn these cars into a full-blown race setup, every one of these cars can be driven daily, even when you load them up with all the FBO full bulldog kind of stuff and modifications. In fact, there's no reason that your spouse couldn't drive this car every day. In fact, my modified Mustang with the nitrous system and then a supercharger, there's a baby seat in the back, and I used to haul my son around with that. So it can be done, and they're still practical, so don't let that dissuade you. Like any used cars, some of these cars have some known quirks or known issues that need to be addressed or researched. Let me do an example. The BMW 335i's might have problems with the high pressure fuel pump or the wastegate rattles or the coil packs. They have problems with coil packs. What you do is you go on the internet when you're looking for a certain type of car and you type in the phrase common problems for this year, make and model car, and you can search for what kind of things you should be looking for. But here's the very best recommendation I can make. No matter what car you're considering, when you get down to the one you're seriously ready to buy, you should pay to have a compression and leak down check done. Why? A compression and leak down check will tell you a lot about the health of the engines. There's no guessing. Doesn't matter if you have all the service records, maybe the rings are bad on the car, or maybe the valve seals are bad. Either one of those issues will be expensive to fix. Bad rings means that the engine needs to be rebuilt, and you're looking at a bill from $2,500 to $8,000 or more, depending on the car. Bad valve seals means you're gonna have to tear the top of the end apart. Maybe it's a few $100, $400 to $600. For some cars, like BMW 7 Series, it's about $7,000. So a compression and leak down test should run about $150 to $300, depending on the car and how much equipment they need to remove to access it to do the test. And remember, if you can't afford $300 to pay for the compression check and the leak down test, you sure as hell can't afford to fix the car if the engine is toast. So those are my recommendations as of summer of 2022. We can revisit this at another time, but thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you another time.